The brain makes its own cholesterol. It has its own machinery. When you take a statin like Lipitor, which can get into the brain, it goes into the brain. It stops the brain from making cholesterol. It interferes with the ability of the brain not only to make new brain cells, it interferes with the ability of the brain to make new memories.
From the Weston A. Price Foundation, welcome to the Wise Traditions podcast for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health. And now here is our host and producer, Hilda Labrada Gore.
Hey, Hilda here. More than 200 million people around the world, including children, take statin drugs for heart health. Unfortunately, evidence indicates that statins lead to a host of health issues and don't actually help with the heart after all. If cholesterol-lowering medications are not the answer for a healthy heart, what is? This is episode 397, and our guest today is David Diamond, a neuroscientist who was prescribed statins and decided to do a little research for himself on cholesterol and heart disease. He found flawed studies using deceptive statistics that convinced him to run in the opposite direction, away from pharmaceuticals. Today, he discusses with us his findings, why he is convinced that we need to question the narrative around cholesterol, and he offers concrete ideas for what to do to keep the heart healthy and strong without prescription medications. Before we dive into the conversation, I want to invite you to give us your feedback on this show. We've set up a survey so we can find out what you like, what we should change to make the show even better, and what you feel neutral about. Whatever you do, tell us what you think. When you fill out the survey, and it only takes a couple of minutes to do so, you will automatically qualify to win the new Weston A. Price Foundation book on the 11 Dietary Principles. I'll put a link in the show description to make it easy for you to take the survey. You can also just find it on our website on the About the Show page regarding the podcast. And thank you in advance for your feedback. And a quick word of thanks to our sponsor, Maritime Seafood Company. Maritime Seafood Company ships sustainable, wild-caught seafood directly to your door. All of their seafood is frozen at the time of harvest, packed in eco-friendly packaging, and delivered to your door within 1 to 2 days. Talk about fresh. So eat well and wild, and with the full assurance that you're supporting small family fisheries that have your health and the health of the environment in mind. Our family loves this seafood. I just ordered more of their shrimp and crab cakes. The seafood is so delectable and sustainably caught, as I may have already mentioned, and packed fresh. It's so good on all the levels, so order yours today. Go to maritimeseafood.com. That's Maritime, MARITHYME, seafood.com, and use the discount code WestonA for 10% off your first order. That's maritimeseafood.com, MARITHYME, seafood.com. Eat wild and well. This is Hilda Labrada Gore, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. Welcome to Wise Traditions, David.
Well, thanks for having me on your show.
I'll never forget a few years back, I would hang out with a friend of mine. We were both in our 30s, and he would be like, oh my gosh, Hilda, I'm losing my mind. It must have been all the drugs I did when I was into rock and roll in the 20s. But he also told me, David, that he was on statins because his family had a history of heart disease. And I thought, gosh, you're 35. Why are you on statins? And then I came to find out later that statins can play a role in poor cognitive function. Is that right?
Oh, that's absolutely right. Yeah, there are clinical studies showing that.
He probably was told you have high cholesterol, your family has a history of heart problems, so we're going to put you on these statins. What's the issue with cholesterol? Here at the foundation, we're always saying it's actually good for you, but talk to us about it as if we knew nothing.
Well, first I should say, your friend at 35 on statins doesn't surprise me. They're actually putting children on statins now, and it's been supported by the American Pediatric Association. But again, the idea is that what you'll get from the American Heart Association and most cardiologists is that cholesterol is this sticky substance. It sticks to your arteries, blocks your arteries. And so you need to reduce cholesterol as much as possible, really almost from birth. And that way you'll live a long, healthy life without heart attacks. And that's completely wrong.
How did you get involved in this issue about cholesterol and diet and health in the first place?
So my expertise is in biology with a specific expertise in neuroscience. And I've been a neuroscientist for over 40 years. And that really was my focus, study the brain and memory, in fact. And so my career was going along just fine until I had a blood test about 25 years ago, which was alarming. My blood test showed extremely high triglycerides. Like I was in the top 1% of all people with triglycerides. And that is really serious. And I had extremely low HDL. That's called the good cholesterol. Mm-hmm. And that combination is a killer. I was given sort of a death sentence, which said, if you don't get your numbers right, you're going to die soon. I had like 15 times greater risk of dying of a heart attack compared to a healthy person. This is 25 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah. So this is why, my expertise is brain function. I didn't know anything about cholesterol. Aside from the fact that we all know in biology, let me just also say, we learned in biology that cholesterol is an essential molecule of life. Cholesterol is called a steroid, a lipid. It is an essential molecule of which we make other hormones. We make estrogen, testosterone. We make vitamin D from cholesterol. So it's an absolutely essential molecule of life, sort of the mother molecule of all steroids. I knew that, but I also was concerned. My cholesterol was high, my triglycerides were high, and my doctor told me I was in serious trouble. So, and he absolutely recommended I go on a statin. And this is again 25 years ago.
Yeah, so what did you do?
Well, I have to tell you, I've been very well funded by drug companies in my neuroscience research. And so I'm not against drugs personally or professionally. I've published papers on how drugs affect the brain. So, I'm not anti-drugs. Mm-hmm. I just figured, after I talked with my doctor, I went back to my office, read a few papers, and just realized the problem I was having was I was eating too much carbohydrates. Now, I happen to have a genetic anomaly, and that's also what I learned. When I eat sugar or any form of carbohydrates, I'm extremely efficient at converting that sugar into fat, more efficient than most people. It's a genetic anomaly, and that's what drives up my triglycerides. It's also what puts me at great risk for having a heart attack. I put my background in biology to good use. I started studying cholesterol and heart disease, and that's why in the last 25 years, this is now my second career. Okay. I have made a scientific study of how cholesterol is actually involved or not involved in heart disease.
So you said cholesterol is an essential molecule for life. Why has it been maligned as the root cause of heart disease?
Great question. It's sort of a complicated answer. On the one hand, we need cholesterol to repair damaged tissue all over the body. Every cell needs cholesterol. So one way to look at this is when your arteries are damaged as a result of high blood sugar or high oxidized lipids, which can occur as a result of eating fried foods, for example, those arteries get damaged. And what comes to the rescue? Cholesterol. Cholesterol is used to repair the tissue. So I often compare it to the spackle you put on the wall after you've got a hole there, and then it would be crazy then to blame the spackle on the cause for the hole. And so cholesterol is absolutely essential to repair damaged tissue, and that is one reason why you find cholesterol in damaged arteries and why you find cholesterol in the plaque of arteries. But there's another thing. Cholesterol can get damaged by high blood sugar. And so what you find is a subset of cholesterol, which is really, in a sense, not natural cholesterol, is the damaged cholesterol. And it's also called small dense LDL or cholesterol. And you see that in higher concentrations when you have high blood sugar. So you see the two go together. You don't have this damaged cholesterol in the absence of high blood sugar. So cholesterol can be, I compare a bit like a teenager. Sometimes it gets connected to a bad crowd, and then you give the cholesterol a bad name because it's hanging out with the wrong cohorts.
Thank you for these illustrations, because I find this all very confusing at times with the HDL and the LDL, and there's good and there's bad. And then some people tell me, I've heard that the problem isn't with HDL, but with the ratio of cholesterol, the right kinds. And I'm like, oh my gosh, my brain is spinning. Can you clarify that a little bit for us, David, as well?
Sure. So the ratio is actually important. The ratio of the HDL, and it's called good cholesterol because in general, higher HDL is associated with better health. But what's really important for the listeners is higher HDL is also a source associated with overall better metabolic health. So people who exercise and don't smoke and have low blood sugar also have higher HDL. So there's nothing magical about HDL. It's simply a marker of good health. There's also, in a sense, triglycerides are really important. Triglycerides are fats that are in your blood, and that's how fat is stored. And you don't want too much triglycerides in your blood because when triglycerides go high, your blood actually gets thicker. You want, ultimately, when you're measuring the two, HDL number should be about the same as the triglyceride number. So you ought to say your HDL is 60 or 70, and your triglyceride is 60 or 70. That's an optimal ratio. Okay, that tells you have good health. My triglycerides were 700. And my HDL was 30. Okay.
Oh my gosh. No wonder you were afraid.
So think about it. If the ideal ratio is 1-to-1, triglyceride to HDL, my ratio was over 20-to-1. And so it was like my doctor was justified in being alerted to how dangerous that was. Mm-hmm. So I was really a ticking cardiovascular time bomb. Now, because I have this genetic anomaly, I have not been able to get my ratio to 1-to-1. And there just aren't enough studies on people like me to know what kind of ratio is associated with really good health. You know, I've lost a good bit of weight. I've gone low carb. I've gotten my triglycerides down to 150. And I've seen from other people with my anomaly, that may be about as low as it's going to go. My HDL gets up to about 50 to 60. So I still don't have that 1-to-1 ratio. And so, you know, I've made it 25 years since having that diagnosis. I'm now just turning 65. And I seem to be doing okay. But there's no guarantee with someone with my genetic condition as to how far I'll go. My brother has the same genetic condition. So I think what's really important is someone with my genetic condition is extremely susceptible to becoming obese. I make fat very easily. I mean, when I go on a binge of carbs on a weekend, I gain 5 pounds just like that. And I know I could be obese if I didn't limit my carbs. And so this is why it's really personally, it's very important to me.
And if I'm hearing you correctly, for the general population, if we don't smoke, if we exercise, if we eat a Wise Tradition style diet, our ratios should be more aligned with what we hope would be a healthy heart, right? And a healthy lifestyle.
Right. We've got 50 years of really good low carb clinical trials. We've got observations of people when you look at triglycerides and HDL for people explicitly on a low carb diet. And here we're talking about normal people, not people like me.
Yeah.
Normal people, when they go low carb, their triglycerides plummet, typically below 100, and the HDL rises. And you've got a ratio that's pretty close to 1-to-1, typically less than 2 or 3-to-1. And so that really is ideal. So when you cut the sugar, and I think in general, not having the oxidized fats, the deep fried fats, you're looking at people who have optimized their metabolic health.
Well, and of course, here at the Weston A. Price Foundation, we warn people away from the seed oils and those fried foods that they would find on a roadside stand or in their chips. You know, those aren't just carbs. They're killer carbs, if you will, because they're made with these rancid oils. We are big fans of saturated fat. I don't know how you feel about that, but we're big into that because we think it's actually more ancestral.
So I grew up with the idea that being a vegetarian was healthy. I was not a vegetarian, but I didn't eat much meat. And in fact, when my doctor first told me I was at high risk of having a heart attack, I went even further and cut back on my meat. And I thought it was really great that I was eating bread without the butter and without the cheese to show you how ignorant a scientist can be. And so I grew up with this idea, and it's really in my research, and I've given talks on this and I've published papers on this, that I completely agree with Wise Traditions, that saturated fat has been demonized, that all forms of natural saturated fats are very healthy for you, including the tropical oils. And I think this is in part, this is just personal, this is philosophy. You've got vegetarians that are demonizing saturated fat, and you've also got a financial interest in which tropical oils have been demonized in large part because they're primarily saturated fats and because the U.S. doesn't produce much in the way of saturated tropical oils. So it's a political, socioeconomic battle as well.
And talking about financial gain leads us to statins, right? I'm thinking if only more patients knew that a change in diet and lifestyle could improve their heart health and their overall health, the statin profit margin would go way down, right?
Yeah, well, this is something that I researched heavily and I've published papers on. And we have a paper out this week on it, which I'll share with you afterward. Kind of the idea with the statin is that high cholesterol is bad for you. Statin is a drug that interferes with the enzyme that enables cholesterol to be formed. And so you reduce cholesterol levels with the statin. And there actually are published studies showing a reduced incidence of heart attacks and death with statins given to people. The best studies have been in what they call secondary prevention. People who already had a heart attack, they take a statin, and there is a reduced incidence of heart attacks. And what I show in my papers, in my presentations, is that the reduction in heart attacks appears to be enormous, that heart attacks are reduced by 50% when you take a statin. Now, that sounds pretty impressive, doesn't it?
It sure does.
Okay. And this is what I have talked about, and I have published papers on this. Let me just show you how you can play with numbers. I can show you how I can double your chances of winning the lottery. And I'll sell you this trick for only $50. If you So what does doubling mean? Here it is for free. If you buy 2 tickets to win the lottery, you are doubling your chances comparing to buying 1 ticket. It's true. 2 is twice as much as 1. And yet it's still, let's say, 1 in 100 million that you're going to actually win compared to 2 in 100 million. Well, that's the kind of way in which the statin advocates have manipulated the numbers. So when I tell you, let's say there are 2 drugs, one reduces heart attacks by 50%, another drug reduces heart attacks by 1%. Which drug would you rather take?
The one that reduces it by 50%, yeah.
And it's the same drug. This is what is remarkable. So in the studies, and these are real numbers, what you've got is 2% of the people given a placebo, no drug, have a heart attack, and 1% of the people don't have a heart attack given a statin. Now, going from 2 to 1 is 50%. 1 is half of 2. And this is why in the advertisements and in the medical conventions, and what people hear from their doctors is you have 50% less likely to have a heart attack when you take a statin. But what the real number is 1%, and that's a typical number. Now, it gets even more ridiculous. There was a trial called Jupiter, one of the first trials, which rosuvastatin, Crestor. And in Crestor, the rate of heart attacks in the placebo people was 0.75%. That's given placebo. And the rate in people given a statin was about 0.4%. So we're talking about less than 1% of all people. But again, look at those numbers. 0.4 is about a half of 0.75. And so in the ads for Crestor, you will see that it reduces heart attacks by 50%. Mind-boggling, isn't it?
It is mind-boggling. And a patient in the doctor's office hearing the alarming cholesterol numbers would be quick to take any medicine. Most people are not going to do the deep dive that you have done, David. And this is really disheartening because I do understand that statins come with a host of side effects and complications for our health, right?
Right. So the first thing, again, to emphasize is the effects are very small, only in people who've already had a heart attack. So in what they call primary prevention, in which people have not had a heart attack, it's negligible, almost zero.
Wow.
And the second thing, yes, the side effects have been absolutely minimized. They have been ignored. And what I find, and again, I present this, I publish this, when we talk about side effects or the adverse effects, how do the statin advocates present it? They don't use what's called the relative risk is the 50%. They'll say the side effects increase from 1 to 2% of some side effects, such as development of diabetes, or from 5% in control to 10% in the people with statins. They'll say the increase is negligible, 5%. They don't present the numbers in what's called the relative risk, in which there is a doubling in the rate of diabetes. We just published a paper, and we've been publishing papers over the years, in which we documented 40 medical peer-reviewed papers documenting a host of adverse effects of statins, including brain fog, impaired cognitive effects. There is one really important paper published over a decade ago showing elderly people, 75-year-old people on statins, explicitly taken off of their statins. These are people diagnosed with dementia. This is really want to pause and chew on this. 75-year-old men and women diagnosed with dementia, taking statins. They're all taken off the statins. The dementia disappeared. They got better. And what's crucial in this study is they put them all back on the statin. Dementia returned. Now think about the explosion, the epidemic of Alzheimer's we have. And almost half of all adults now are looking to take statins. How many of those people diagnosed with Alzheimer's have impaired brain functioning because of the statins we're taking?
Coming up, David discusses why these findings are not presented in mainstream media. He also gives his recommendations on keeping a healthy heart without prescription medications.
You're listening to the Wise Traditions podcast from the Weston A. Price Foundation. We pause now to recognize our sponsors.
FTP Financial. Is your financial health as good as your dietary or nutritional health? Are you interested in retiring early with more income? For decades, premium finance advice was only available to those with a net worth of $5 million or more. Today, it's available to anyone who's willing to save a portion of their income. Reach out to Jay Kim at FTP Financial for more details. Less risk, more retirement income. Retire at any age. Go to ftpfinancial.net for more info. And Optimal Carnivore. Have you heard about their Brain Nourish product? It contains grass-fed beef brain and lion's mane mushrooms to help improve focus, lift mood, boost memory, provide greater clarity, and enhance creativity. All the things we can all use this time of year. I'm taking this daily, and what I like about Optimal Carnivore is that their ingredients are top-notch. They only use 100% real mushrooms, organic fruiting bodies, which are rigorously tested for active compounds. And the beef brain is sourced from the highest quality regenerative farms in New Zealand. The mission at Optimal Carnivore is to make it easy for people to consume the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. And they're going full speed ahead on it. Plus, they also plant one tree for every product sold, which helps the environment. So go to amazon.com/optimalcarnivore to order your products today. And use the code WESTON10 to receive 10% off everything you order. Again, that's amazon.com/optimalcarnivore and the code WESTON10. This is Hilda Labrada Gore, and you're listening to Wise Traditions.
What's really important is the brain is unique. The brain makes its own cholesterol. The brain needs cholesterol to be able to make new brain cells, make new synapses, and to make memory. And so the brain has control over its cholesterol. And the brain is what's called the blood-brain barrier. It can keep drugs from getting into it. And so many of the statins are not able to get into the brain. And what's interesting, it's the statins that can get into the brain that interfere with the ability of the brain to make cholesterol. Those are the statins that produce cognitive deficits. And we published a paper about a decade ago on this. And the study that showed the reversal of dementia, primarily it's the drugs that can get into the brain. So I want you to think about this. The brain makes its own cholesterol. It has its own machinery. When you take a statin like Lipitor, which can get into the brain, it goes into the brain. It stops the brain from making cholesterol. It interferes with the ability of the brain not only to make new brain cells, it interferes with the ability of the brain to make new memories.
That is the drug I'm pretty sure that my 35-year-old friend was on.
Lipitor, the most widely prescribed statin.
He couldn't think straight. And plus, he was 35 again, keep in mind, fairly young. He had joint pain.
That is, along with cognitive deficits, joint pain is extremely common. There has been a great effort by the statin advocates to say this isn't real, that it's all in your head. It's called the nocebo effect, which is you've been told statins will cause joint pain. Therefore, you have joint pain. It's all in your head. Well, it's not all in your head. It's in your joints. It truly does interfere with muscle function. It causes muscle atrophy, which then ultimately impairs kidney function. So there are studies showing kidney injury associated with statin use. You've got impaired liver function, potentially even heart failure related to statin use. And there's an epidemic of heart failure now. And along with the Wise Traditions, I think what's really important to appreciate is the heart depends to a great extent on ketones. Ketones nourish the heart as well as the brain. And the ketones, again, are produced as a result of a very low-carb diet. So this is information. Now, when you talk about mainstream media basically is a financial business. Mainstream media, when we're talking about networks, you're not going to have me interviewed on networks, and you're not going to hear about this kind of information on mainstream media. You're hearing this pretty much in social media, but in general, this isn't in mainstream media, because how could you have someone like me talk about this and then right afterward have a commercial for Lipitor, right? So it's not going to happen in mainstream media, but we are getting our message out in social media and in my publications and publications of other really good people in the medical literature.
Well, I can't wait to get some of those studies in our show description. We'll put them in as a kind of footnote, or at least a link to your sites that people can dive in for themselves. What concerns me the most in this conversation is actually really the young people. You said that younger children are even taking statins now. Is that because some health agency lowered the number of cholesterol and said, okay, now everyone at this level can take the statins?
Yeah, it's a great concern you have. And in fact, we responded to a paper advocating statins for children, and this is published in a journal. So there is an affliction called familial hypercholesterolemia. And these are people who have a genetic anomaly in which they don't bind cholesterol very well to their membrane. And so what happens is the liver cranks out lots and lots of cholesterol. So they'll have 2, 3, 4 times as much cholesterol, specifically LDL, which is called the bad cholesterol. So these are people with this genetic anomaly, which from birth means they have extremely high cholesterol. And it's associated with this, you do find people with familial hypercholesterolemia, a subset of them do have heart attacks very young. And this has been described for over a century. So you find someone that has a heart attack, 20 years of age, dies of a heart attack, they've got cholesterol in their arteries, and they have high cholesterol in their blood. The logical conclusion was, well, this must be the cholesterol that's clogging your arteries. And that's why they want these children to be on statins from the time they're young. We published a paper in which we evaluated the same literature. And what we found, and this is in the medical literature, that it's not the cholesterol. That the people with a genetic anomaly in which they have high cholesterol, the subset of people that have the heart attacks actually have a different genetic anomaly, which is they have high clotting factors. So there's a second genetic anomaly that comes along with a subset of the people that have the high cholesterol. And it's the people that have extremely high clotting factors. One is called fibrinogen. Those are the people that die young of heart disease. What doesn't make sense, if you're thinking about cholesterol clogging arteries, is the vast majority of people with this anomaly, familial hypercholesterolemia, live long, healthy lives. And you've got 80-year-old people with astronomically high cholesterol with this disease who are extremely healthy, not having heart attacks. To which we published and said this just doesn't make sense because it's not the cholesterol, it's the clotting factor.
To your point also about older people with very high levels of cholesterol, even those who don't have that anomaly, Sally Fallon-Morell has told me that as we age, we actually do our body increases the amount of cholesterol it produces. So that shouldn't be alarming. But in the conventional medical circles that we run in, they are always saying, lower it, it's not good. But we actually need that cholesterol. Do you agree with that?
Well, first, I wouldn't agree that our cholesterols rise with age if we are healthy. I often hear about blood pressure rises with age, which it doesn't. So my blood pressure hasn't changed in the past 25 years, and I hate to admit it, but I'm now considered elderly. And I think what's really important is looking at the person's metabolism. A person that is healthy and exercises, has low blood sugar, and is not overweight, their basic metabolism is stable. Okay, and this is really what we have to emphasize. So much of the work is done on unhealthy people. But when you look at healthy people, you don't see these. As far as I can find in the literature, you don't see age-related changes. There actually have been studies comparing people who are healthy, and as they age, their blood pressure doesn't rise. It's really the overweight people who don't exercise. Yeah, their blood pressure rises, their cholesterol may rise. So yes, you're absolutely right. We need cholesterol for our brain to be healthy. But again, the brain makes its own cholesterol. When you take a blood test, you're not actually getting the brain levels of cholesterol. Okay, you're seeing what's out there in the blood.
Well, I want to go back to your point as we begin to wrap up now, that it is not fat or meat that we necessarily need to avoid to get that appropriate cholesterol ratio as much as it is carbs and sugar that we should be considering lowering, especially. And of course, we're all about avoiding the refined sugars and flours and such and going back to more ancestral ways of eating. Is there anything else you would recommend to help protect our hearts and have that right ratio?
Well, first, I want to agree with everything you just said. And so I think what we want to think about is somewhat like, I think, the paleo kind of diet. We need to think about what did humans evolve to consume. When we think about foods that came into existence really in the past 10,000 years, what we're looking at are foods that are entirely novel. I mean, there's just an absurdity out there talking about meat being unhealthy. I've seen these vegetarian advocates say meat causes diabetes. And there's just an absurdity to that, to think that how can meat, which is something humans are adapted to consume, somehow raise our blood sugar or damage our pancreas? And that makes no sense. I've seen this emphasis on legumes, which is, first realize, if you eat raw beans, you're going to die. Okay, this is something we are not made to consume raw beans. And think about how extensively it has to be processed before you can even partially digest beans. So I think what people really need to understand is our immune system looks at some of these novel foods, including grains, and our immune system interprets grains, in particular the wheat, as an invader. And so it's as if wheat is like a virus or a bacteria. When our immune system attacks the wheat, which of course also damages our colon, we get all kinds of autoimmune diseases. Mm-hmm. And so I really think what we want to focus on, and I completely agree with Wise Traditions, I agree with Sally, that what we want to focus on is what was the lifestyle 50,000 years ago? People were active. People were primarily consuming food obtained from animals. Yeah, when there wasn't any food, which probably was rare. I mean, humans are the apex hunters, predators. Probably what drove our evolution was that we were humans are so incredibly good at killing animals, far superior than any other creatures around. Animals appear to have gone extinct wherever humans went. So there probably weren't long periods of starvation in which we were dependent on eating fruits and vegetables. And even then, there really weren't much in the way of fruits and vegetables available to us, nothing like what you see in the supermarket. So absolutely, I'm an advocate for thinking about what was human life 20, 30, 50,000 years ago. It was basically consuming, to a great extent, animals. And of course, if it can be pasture raised, it's far healthier, than one that's not. And even for vegetarians, I emphasize to people, you can have eggs and cheese and animals don't have to die for that. Find pasture raised chickens, eat eggs and cheese, you get lots of nutrition from that. And it's far better than being a vegan. So as far as what I recommend to remain heart healthy, it's just so simple. Don't smoke. Eat pasture-raised animals. Don't eat grains. I mean, just basically eliminate grains. Don't follow for the foolishness about legumes being healthy for you. Follow essentially. Now, a subset, I do want to add this, a subset of people I do think have a problem with dairy. Dairy is a relatively new food for our species. And I do think there are some people that don't respond well to dairy. And I think they just need to be sensitive to what they're reacting to, because dairy is something that resulted from a domestication of animals, which is relatively new. So ultimately, I think you need to think about how do you respond to certain foods? Don't take anti-inflammatories. Realize if you're sedentary and you're overweight and you're eating crap, you say, well, I have inflammation. I'll take a drug to reduce my inflammation. No, change the core factor that's causing you to be unhealthy. Change your diet, change your lifestyle, which is a heck of a lot harder than just taking a pill. But I always say to people, you don't find good health in a pill. Change your diet, change your lifestyle. Here it is, 25 years later, I've never taken a statin. I never will. And I don't take any medication at all. So I feel very fortunate to have had a background in biology that's enabled me to get here 25 years later to be able to talk with you and share what I've learned.
Wow. And also for the listener, because they can't see you like I can, this man does not look like he's 60-something. He just looks great. So thank you for these words of advice. Now I just have two more questions for you, David. Besides your website, can you give me some links that I can stick in the show description so that people can find resources and study some of these things for themselves?
Sure. I'll send you a lot.
Okay, awesome. And if the listener could just do one thing to improve their health, just one step in that direction of maybe being less sedentary or changing their diet, what would that first recommendation be for them from you?
Exercise is good, but it's not the antidote to a bad diet. People sometimes think, well, I'll exercise and I'll lose weight and I'll get healthy. Yes, exercise is good, but it won't enable you to lose weight by itself. And so, although I advocate for exercise, it is secondary to minimizing your carb consumption. And understand, we're not just talking about refined sugar, which of course is bad. I think making that change to reduce food that will raise your blood sugar. I do recommend getting a continuous glucose monitor for people. You can see that increase in blood sugar. I was surprised at how high my blood sugar went if I had bread or cereal. So you can get this prescribed by a doctor. I think the first thing is realize eating bread or potatoes. And, people think sweet potatoes are great. Sweet potatoes are still going to raise your blood sugar. So the first thing to target is any food that will raise your blood sugar. And so that's, of course, refined sugar. That's bread. That's potatoes. Reduce anything that will raise your blood sugar. If you can, give up the grains, which will reduce the inflammation. That's the primary thing. And sure, get out, enjoy life, be active.
I love it, David. Thank you so much for this conversation. It's really been fantastic.
Thank you, Hilda. It's been a pleasure.
Our guest today was David Diamond. Follow him on Twitter at LDL Skeptic. And I'm Hilda Labrador, the host and producer of the Wise Traditions podcast for the Weston A. Price Foundation. Look for me on my YouTube channel, Holistic Hilda, and on Instagram at Holistic Hilda. And for the transcript for this episode, visit our website, westonaprice.org, and click on the podcast page. And now for a recent review from Apple Podcasts. El Glute Love had this to say: nutrition for the ears. I am so glad to have found this podcast. I've followed the Weston A. Price Foundation for about a year, but only recently did it dawn on me to see if they had a podcast. It is fantastic. I've loved all of the guests and all of the views they bring. El Glute Love, thank you so much for your review. It really means a lot to us. And you too can leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Just go to the app or go online, click on ratings and review, give us as many stars as you like, and tell the world what you think of the show. It will certainly help attract new listeners. And thank you so much for listening, my friend. Stay well. Hasta pronto.
On behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation, thanks for listening. We have many free resources to support you on your health journey. Visit westonaprice.org to find podcasts, articles, videos, and more. You can also find a local chapter near you for help in finding sources of great food. We invite you to support the Foundation's mission of education, research, and activism by becoming a member. Thanks again, and take care. Wise Traditions is a project of the Weston A. Price Foundation for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. The content on this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended to substitute for the advice provided by your doctor or other healthcare professional. It is not intended to be, nor does it constitute healthcare or medical advice.